It seems that ever since the character debuted in the final pages of Incredible Hulk number 180, the history of the X-Men member Wolverine has just been a fragmented mess. You know, he's been known as Wolverine, Logan, Weapon 10. He's actually older than his body appears to be. He fought in World War II alongside Captain America. And at one point, it was thought that he would actually be an evolved Wolverine. It wouldn't be until 2001 that the character's beginnings would finally be revealed in Origin, the true story of Wolverine. Now, this was met with a bit of outcry from both fans and comic creators alike, most of whom liked the mystery behind the character. But Marvel editor-in-chief at the time, Joe Quesada, made it clear, if Marvel Comics didn't do it, the movies probably would eventually tackle the origin. So Marvel was kind of in a damned if they do, damned if they don't spot. Just how is Origin the true story of Wolverine? Well, let's take a look and find out.
We open up in early 20th century Alberta, Canada. A carriage brings an orphaned Irish immigrant girl named Rose to the Howlett estate. She is to be the companion of the family's young invalid son, James. While waiting to enter the home, Rose gets teased by a boy named Dog, the son of Thomas Logan, the Howlett's rather familiar-looking groundskeeper. As Rose settles into the home, young James Howlett plays outside, where he meets up with Dog. Time passes as Rose notes in her journal several aspects of the Howlett family. James's constant illnesses, Mrs. Howlett's reclusiveness in the wake of oldest son John Jr.'s death, and the laissez-faire attitude of Father John Howlett Sr., which is much to the chagrin of John Howlett Sr.'s father. Rose and James do, however, maintain something of a relationship with Dog Logan, until one day when James accidentally falls into a pond while playing with Dog. This results in James almost freezing to death and Dog getting beaten by his alcoholic father. Christmas soon comes. Rose receives a fancy dress, James a puppy, and even Dog receives a toy train given to him by John Howlett, though John's father warns him about the last of these actions. This does begin to bear fruit as Dog rushes home and shows the train to his father, only to receive yet another beating. A couple of years later, and Rose begins to dread seeing Dog as he spies on her through a window. Rose is sent to retrieve some sheets for Mrs. Howlett while James begins being taught the ins and outs of the family's copper mining empire. Rose returns with the clean sheets and inadvertently walks in on Mrs. Howlett, revealing the sight of several claw marks covering her torso.
Now, do keep this image in mind for later.
As Rose exits the house in an attempt to regain her composure, she runs into Dog. Dog begins trying to force himself on Rose when James interrupts. Rose is able to fight off Dog. Later, John Howlett chastises Thomas Logan for the actions of his son, but Logan pays him no mind. After another beating from Thomas, Dog manages to come across James and takes some revenge by killing James's puppy. This results in Thomas Logan being removed from the Howlett estate. Instead of another beating of his son, however, Thomas Logan grabs 2 shotguns and begins making his way to the Howlett estate, with Dog in tow. Upon reaching the estate, Thomas and Dog take Rose hostage and use her to enter the house. Then they make their way to Mrs. Howlett's room. Thomas calls Mrs. Howlett Elizabeth and tells her that the three will leave with some money tonight. The commotion causes John Howlett to come rushing into the room. James then enters the room just in time to see Thomas shoot John with a shotgun. Thomas tells Dog to take out James and Rose, but Rose manages to disrupt Dog's shot at James. James then punches Dog, blinding him somehow in the process. James then charges at Thomas as Elizabeth begs Thomas not to kill James as well. Thomas briefly turns to Elizabeth, but then collapses as he is skewered by the claws that have sprung out of James's hands. In the fallout, Elizabeth's mental condition continues to deteriorate, as what James has done has apparently happened to her before. James tries to seek some comfort from his mother, only to be rebuked. James then runs screaming from the house, with Rose in pursuit. Elizabeth does try to provide some comfort to the still blinded Dog, and then she picks up the shotgun and turns it on herself.
Now, if you haven't made the connection already, it's fairly obvious that Thomas Logan and Elizabeth Howlett have been having an affair, and James is the product of that. And James is who we will come to know as Wolverine. One could also theorize that Thomas Logan is also the father of John Howlett Jr., since, if you remember, Elizabeth had those scratches on her torso, which means he probably also had claws coming out of his hands, or something to that effect at one point. Now, mutants in the Marvel Universe aren't exactly a new thing. Publication-wise, Namor the Submariner, who's often referred to as Marvel's first mutant, dates all the way back to World War II. And the X-Men villain Apocalypse dates all the way back to ancient Egypt.
James's grandfather is called to the house, where Dog Logan blames the whole thing on Rose. Rose and James, meanwhile, have taken refuge in a nearby barn. Rose notices that James's claws have begun to retract back into his hand. James also seems to have no memory of recent events.
Now, part of Wolverine's mutant healing factor is that his mind will put up blocks around memories that he just doesn't seem to want to remember. That's why the character's always had such a choppy memory of his past.
Rose and James make their way to James's grandfather's house. Upon seeing the still retracting claws, the grandfather pays Rose to take James away and never return. Rose and James make their way to the Yukon Territory, where they stop in a nearby quarry. There, the foreman named Smitty offers them jobs in exchange for food and board. Rose then introduces James as her cousin, but gives him a new name: Logan. As James/Logan starts to work at the camp, he struggles. He is still a little too weak to safely move a wheelbarrow, and he finds himself being constantly tortured by Cookie Malone, the camp chef. Smitty does come to James's aid, but Rose documents that James is slowly withdrawing further and further from human contact. James does slowly begin to adapt. He kills a deer, explaining to Rose that he seems to be fulfilling an urge. Meanwhile, Smitty and Rose begin to bond as he teaches her how to read fine poetry. While this is happening, James has begun hunting with a pack of wolves. Smitty then offers Logan a job lighting dynamite in order to loosen more gravel for the quarry. Logan proves to be quite proficient at this new job and begins to get more popular with the rest of the camp, save for Cookie. In an attempt to get revenge, Cookie makes his way to the munitions storage depot and begins cutting the fuses of several sticks of dynamite. Cookie's actions result in a cave-in. The only survivors are Logan and a young child. As he heals from the cave-in, James receives a gift from Smitty, a book about samurai warriors.
Foreshadowing!
James then heals up and goes to the home of one of the people killed in the cave-in. He finds Cookie scavenging the place, looking for scraps that he can sell. Cookie and James get into a fight. This time, James wins. In his exuberance, James rushes to tell Rose, only to find her and Smitty in a passionate embrace. Elsewhere, James's grandfather is on his deathbed. In deep regret for exiling his grandson, he dispatches someone to bring James back so he can claim his inheritance. The man promises to hunt James to the ends of the earth. Like a dog.
Now, it was a widely held belief among fans that Dog Logan was also Victor Creed, aka Sabretooth, Wolverine's longtime mutant rival. Given that both Wolverine and Sabretooth have mutant healing factors, and it looks like Dog Logan also seems to have a mutant healing factor, and that Dog Logan does bear something of a physical resemblance to Victor Creed, that could have been the case. However, it was later revealed in another miniseries that Wolverine met the Creeds, including Victor, all of whom had mutant healing factors as well. Also, Dog Logan has appeared in the modern Marvel Universe.
Heartbroken, James begins to withdraw from Rose and Smitty. Rose comes to James and informs him that she and Smitty are engaged and are planning to move out of the quarry. James rejects Rose's offer to accompany her and Smitty on their journey. Meanwhile, Smitty has been struggling to get enough money for train tickets out of the quarry. Eventually, Smitty signs up for a tuck fan contest. It turns out that Logan has signed up for the contest as well. Smitty tries to comfort Rose, saying that he is more than tough enough for the contest, but whether Logan was on their side remains to be seen. The tournament is held, and both Logan and Smitty make it to the finals. During the final fight, Logan begins to gain the upper hand, only to tell Smitty to hit him. Smitty hits Logan and wins the fight. After receiving the prize money, Smitty names Logan the new foreman of the quarry and leaves to pick up Rose. James then hears someone calling him Little James Howlett. It's Dog. Smitty gets to Rose, but then she leaves in order to get Logan, fearing for his safety. As the fight with Dog continues, James's memories begin to return to him. He pops out his claws and goes for one final slash. Unfortunately, Rose intercedes and ends up getting stabbed by James's claws. Realizing what he's done, James runs off into the wild. Sometime later, Smitty tries to find Logan, but Logan leaves with his pack of wolves, choosing instead to forget everything. Meanwhile, Cookie Malone begins scrounging through Rose's and James' cabin, where he finds the journal Rose has been keeping throughout this story. Finding no worth in it, Cookie throws it into the fireplace, where it burns, destroying Logan's memories along with it.
Wolverine would eventually regain his memories in the aftermath of Marvel's House of M event. As for Origin, the true story of Wolverine, I'd have to give it a B. The artwork is gorgeous, the story is alright, but there's a lot of silent montages in it, which at times comes across as padding. And that brings us to another end of a random trade review, which means we have to select which title we'll be reviewing next time.